This set of notes is on some key vocabulary terms for our first unit of the new semester, covering the Civil War and Reconstruction. Make sure you get the notes down on the outline that is posted to portals and print them before the start of the next class. Pause it as you need to in order to get the notes down. So the first key vocab term is the Missouri Compromise. And these terms that are coming from Chapter 9 of the textbook are key events, key ideas that happened prior to the outbreak of the Civil War. And what the Missouri Compromise was, it's an 1820 compromise where Missouri entered the Union as a slave state, Maine as a free state. And then a line was drawn across the rest of the Louisiana Territory, north of which slavery was banned. So if you take a look at the map, the blue are the slave states and slave territories. Right above that red line, you see the blue MO, that's Missouri. Missouri comes in as a slave state. Maine gets added as a free state, so both sides get a state. And then that orange area above the red line, that was determined to be territory in which slavery was closed off. Another compromise that we're going to be discussing, the Compromise of 1850. This was, surprise, surprise, an 1850 compromise that admitted California as a free state. It banned slavery in Washington, D.C., and it also established a stronger fugitive slave law. So you can see from 1820 to 1850, all of a sudden the map is more filled out. And you can also see in both of these compromises that the free states are getting something that they want, and the slave states are getting something that they want. That's what makes it a compromise. Fugitive slave law. That was part of the Compromise of 1850. What is that? It was a law passed that allowed for the capture and return of slaves who escaped into another state or territory. And it even put fines on people who refused to enforce the law or who helped slaves to escape. So fugitive just means runaway. So a fugitive slave law, a runaway slave law, it forced people to return runaway slaves and would even penalize them if they didn't. Uncle Tom's Cabin, that one is in italics for a reason. It's a book. Uncle Tom's Cabin is a novel written by a woman named Harriet Beecher Stowe that was about slavery, and it described how cruel slavery was so clearly that it actually fanned the flames of tension and increased conflict between people who supported slavery, who thought it was unfair, and people who opposed slavery, who thought it showed just how horrible slavery is. The Kansas-Nebraska Act. This was a law passed by Congress that established Kansas and Nebraska as new territories who were allowed to decide for themselves whether or not to accept slavery. And that was something called popular sovereignty. So this brought two new territories, organized two new territories, but also introduced this concept of popular sovereignty, where when a territory wanted to become a state, they could have a vote and decide whether it would be a slave state or a free state. Moving on to Chapter 10, the rest of Chapter 10, these terms, are from the chapter that deals with the Civil War itself. And the first one we have is the Anaconda Plan. And the Anaconda Plan was the strategy of the North in the Civil War. It was designed to squeeze the life out of the South, kind of like an anaconda attacks its prey. And it was going to do this by blocking southern ports, by taking control of the Mississippi River, and kind of cutting off the South and squeezing it. The Emancipation Proclamation. This was an order issued by President Lincoln in 1863 to free the slaves in the Confederate States. Emancipation means to set free. So Lincoln decides to emancipate or free slaves in the southern states with the Emancipation Proclamation. Sherman's March to the Sea was a devastating march during the Civil War led by a guy named William Sherman that went through Georgia, and as you can see in the picture, just absolutely annihilated everything in the way. Burned down houses, ripped up farms, destroyed railroads, just really took it to the South. A couple terms from Chapter 11. These are terms that go along with the chapter on Reconstruction, so the aftermath of the Civil War. And the first is the 13th Amendment, which was a constitutional change ratified in 1865 that abolished slavery in the United States. Radical Republican. Radical means sort of extreme. A radical Republican was somebody, a member of the Republican Party during and after the Civil War, who believed in and fought for the emancipation of slaves at first, and then later equal rights for African Americans. And that was considered radical. That was considered extreme during the time. Perhaps the best known of these was this guy here, Thaddeus Stevens. He was a very well-known radical Republican who felt that slaves should be freed, and then once they were freed, felt that African Americans should be treated equally as everyone else. If you've seen the movie Lincoln, this is the guy that Tommy Lee Jones portrayed in the movie Lincoln. A term you've probably heard of, the Ku Klux Klan or the KKK, a secret white supremacist terrorist group that resisted Reconstruction by tormenting African Americans. Jim Crow laws. These were any of the laws that legalized racial segregation of blacks and whites in southern states. So, for example, see in the picture, drinking fountains that were only for African Americans, right? African Americans were not allowed to use the drinking fountains that white people used. The last term is Plessy v. Ferguson. And this is in italics. It's a Supreme Court case. And it was a very controversial Supreme Court case that said that segregation was okay. It actually said it was allowed as long as the facilities for blacks were separate but equal to those provided for whites. They said it's okay for states to separate black people and white people as long as the different facilities are separate but equal. And as this cartoon points out, that was very rarely, if ever, the case. You see this magnificent fountain for white people, and then African Americans are given something that is definitely separate, but very clearly not equal. Make sure you get all of the definitions down. Please pay close attention to spelling and print your vocab notes before the next class.